Here's the story. In the foothills of North Dakota, just outside of town, a preacher was sent. He put up a tent, throwed sawdust on the ground. He laid some boards upon some blocks. Those were to be his pews, and from the bottom of a barrel turned upside down is where he would deliver the news. Now, the very first night of the meeting, the crowd was rather small. Just one old Indian by the name of Joe, and he stayed to hear it all. That preacher preached for a solid hour, but what intrigued Joe the most was a place where he read from the book of Acts about tongues and the Holy Ghost. And when the preacher finished, Joe came forward with a beautiful knife and sheath. He said, "God, you give Joe Holy Ghost, he give you knife to keep." Well, needless to say, nothing happened, and old Joe went away with a frown. The next evening, in front of 36 people, old Indian Joe came down. This time he had a tomahawk, a bow and arrow, a pipe, a knife, a homemade blanket, a beautiful knife and sheath. He said, "God, you give Joe Holy Ghost, he give you all this to keep." Well, needless to say, nothing happened. Joe packed up all of his goods. They heard him mumbling, Joe trying to trade fair, as he disappeared into the woods. The next night, the tent was filled to capacity, all to the preacher's delight. But what he didn't know is they came to see Joe and to see if the price is right. And right down through the middle of that tent came a pinto pony, a tomahawk, a bow and arrow, a blanket, a beautiful knife and sheath. He said, "God, you give Joe Holy Ghost, he'll give you all this to keep." Well, needless to say, nothing happened, and old Joe began to nod. Then the tears ran down his leather face as he raised his hands to God. He said, "God, Joe always been very good trader. Now Joe's hair is white like snow. And if you'll give Joe Holy Ghost, Joe will give you Joe." Well, needless to say, the Holy Ghost came, and Joe was quickly filled. God let him keep the pinto pony, the tomahawk, the blanket, to keep out the chill. Now, Joe didn't want that old pipe, so he threw it as far as he could throw. And the people in the foothills of North Dakota will never forget the trade between God and Joe.